بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله ولتنظر نفس ما قدمت لغد واتقوا الله إن الله خبير بما تعملون. ولا تكونوا كالذين نسوا الله فأنساهم أنفسهم أولئك هم الفاسقون. لا يستوي أصحاب النار وأصحاب الجنة أصحاب الجنة هم الفائزون. لو أنزلنا هذا القرآن على جبل لرأيته خاشعا متصدعا من خشية الله. وتلك الأمثال نضربها للناس لعلهم يتفكرون. هو الله الذي لا إله إلا هو عالم الغيب والشهادة هو الرحمن الرحيم. هو الله الذي لا إله إلا هو الملك القدوس السلام المؤمن المهيمن العزيز الجبار المتكبر. سبحان الله عما يشركون. هو الله الخالق البارئ المصور له الأسماء الحسنى يسبح له ما في السماوات والأرض وهو العزيز الحكيم. صدق الله العظيم.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا. سعادة الأستاذ الدكتور عبد الرحمن اليوبي وكيل الجامعة للشؤون التعليمية، أصحاب السعادة وكلاء الجامعة، أصحاب السعادة عمداء الكليات، الإخوة والأخوات زملائي أعضاء هيئة التدريس، طلاب برنامج الماجستير التنفيذي بكلية الاقتصاد والإدارة، أبناؤنا وبناتنا الطلاب، السادة الضيوف، الحفل الكريم، أرحب بكم أجمل ترحيب وأحييكم في هذا المساء أجمل تحية. والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. هذه فرصة ثمينة لأعبر عن خالص شكري وعظيم تقديري لإدارة هذه الجامعة الفتية بقيادة معالي مدير الجامعة الأستاذ الدكتور أسامة بن صادق طيب. إن الجامعة جامعة الملك عبد العزيز ظلت وما فتأت تقدم الرعاية والعناية والاهتمام لأنشطة مركز أبحاث الاقتصاد الإسلامي، والتي بفضلها تبوأ المركز مكانة سامية ودرجة رفيعة في مجال البحث العلمي على المستوى المحلي والإقليمي. أسأل الله أن يجزيهم عنا خير الجزاء. يشاركنا في هذا الحفل 3 مؤسسات راعية له تحمل رسالة الارتقاء بالبحث العلمي والتطبيق العملي للاقتصاد الإسلامي. فالمعهد الإسلامي للبحوث والتدريب التابع لمجموعة البنك الإسلامي للتنمية ظل ومنذ تأسيسه يحمل لواء الاقتصاد الإسلامي، واستطاع أن ينشر المئات من البحوث والكتب والدراسات، وأن ينظم العديد من المؤتمرات والندوات في الاقتصاد الإسلامي. ويشارك أحد كبار باحثي المعهد بورقة عمل مميزة في هذه الندوة. أما شركة الخبير للمتاجرة بالاستثمار والتمويل التي تأسست على الاقتصاد الإسلامي ومبادئه وتقدم نموذجا رائعا وممارسة رشيدة في الاستثمار والتمويل الإسلامي. وبالرغم من حداثة تجربة هذه الشركة إلا أنها شقت طريقها بقوة وأخذت موقعها بين المؤسسات الرائدة في الاستثمار الإسلامي، ولديها تجربة ثرة في إدارة الأصول نتعرض لبعض جوانبها في هذا اللقاء. وجريدة المدينة الراعي الإعلامي لهذه الندوة كانت وما زالت تصدع بالحق وتدعم الفضيلة بنهج متزن رصين عبر صفحاتها المتنوعة، وتنشر الفكر والثقافة الإسلامية على مدى عقود من الزمن. إن دعم هذه المؤسسات الثلاثة ومشاركتهم المركز والكلية في تنظيم هذا اللقاء له أثر كبير في نجاحه، فله منا جميعا كل الشكر والتقدير والامتنان.
الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف المرسلين سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه ومن اتبع سنته واهتدى بهديه إلى يوم الدين. سعادة الأستاذ دكتور عبد الرحمن اليوبي، سعادة العمداء والوكلاء، الزملاء أعضاء هيئة التدريس، الحفل الكريم، الطلبة والطالبات، السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. ها نحن مرة أخرى بعد أن ابتدأنا عامنا الدراسي بحديث عن الأزمة وأسبابها وآثارها، نعود مرة أخرى للحديث من جانب آخر عن إدارة الأصول في إطار الأزمة. وقد طلب مني المنظمون أن أتحدث عن أساسيات إدارة الأصول، فركزت جهدي على هذا الموضوع في إطار الأزمة وبصلته بالمؤسسات الأساسية التي كانت وراء الأزمة والتي تتمثل في المصارف. My colleagues, I'm sorry I would like to speak in Arabic, but anyway I have made the presentation in English because I was receiving confusing signals whether to speak in Arabic or in English. So anyway I have decided that to speak in Arabic. But anyway, I hope that you will manage and maximize your presence here, and I hope the audience will ask you in Arabic. Okay? فأقول وبالله التوفيق أن الأسئلة التي سنحاول الإجابة عنها: ما المقصود بإدارة الأصول بشكل عام، وما تطبيقها في المصارف بشكل خاص، ما هي أهم القضايا التي تولى لها الأهمية في إدارة الأصول لدى المصارف، وهل لأزمة الرهن العقاري السب برايم علاقة بإدارة الأصول؟ كما تعلمون أن الأصول أو إدارة الأصول موضوع كبير جدا. هنالك أصول عينية وهنالك أصول مالية. مثل هذه القاعة التي نجلس فيها يمكن أن نتحدث عن إدارتها من الناحية إدارة الأصول، وهو كيف حازت عليها الجامعة وكيف تحافظ عليها، وما هي الأشياء الأساسية التي تريد أن تحققها الجامعة من هذا. لكننا سنتحدث عن الجانب الآخر للأصول، وهو الذي يتعلق بالأصول أو إدارة الأصول المالية. وما دمنا نتحدث عن إدارة الأصول المالية فهي عملية منظمة تقوم على أسس علمية وإجراءات وخطوات مضبوطة ومدروسة، وفي العادة تقوم بها شركات متخصصة professional management of various securities and assets لإدارة أوراق مالية وأصول عينية من أجل تحقيق أهداف بالنسبة للذين يضعون أموالهم في هذه المؤسسات ويستثمرون أموالهم في هذه المؤسسات. ولا شك أن عملية جذب الأصول من قبل وإدارتها من قبل هذه المؤسسات المحترفة سيؤدي إلى تعظيم المنافع بالنسبة للذين وضعوا واستثمروا أموالهم، وكذلك للحد من المخاطر التي أصبحت تميز العالم الذي نعيش فيه. بالنسبة للغرض الأساسي أو التركيز الأساسي للأصول لإدارة الأصول هو حول كيف نحوز على الموارد وكيف نوزعها وكيف نستخدمها. هذه الأسس الأساسية التي تقوم عليها إدارة الأصول. إذا أردنا أن نتحدث عن إدارة الأصول بالنسبة للمصارف فإننا نجد أنه علاوة على الأشياء التي تحدثنا عنها في جانب الأصول، فإن البنوك تولي أهمية خاصة فيما يتعلق بالخصوم liabilities asset and liability management، وذلك للوضع الخاص الذي تتميز به هذه المؤسسات، حيث أن الأموال تأتيها من مصادر مختلفة من المودعين لودائع تحت الطلب لأجل معين تختلف مدته من اليوم للشهر إلى غير ذلك. إذن they pay attention to the liabilities they have. Thus, لذلك فإنهم لا يكتفون بإدارة الأصول لوحدها، وإنما يدمجون معها الخصوم Asset and Liability Management، والتي يمكن أن نقول عنها أن إدارة المصرف تحاول أن تمزج بين الأصول والخصوم ورأس المال من أجل أن تحقق المنافع أو الأرباح للإنترستد جروبس للمعنيين، وهم المودعون وملاك المصارف وكذلك الهيئات الإشرافية، لأن هذه المؤسسات تخضع لإشراف ولرقابة، فلا بد عند إدارة الأصول والخصوم من قبل الإدارة أن تراعي هذه الجوانب، فتمزج بين الأسيتس واللايبيليتيز and capital من أجل كما قلنا to maximize profits، لكن دون أن يؤدي الأمر إلى تعريض المؤسسة إلى مخاطر أكبر، وخاصة المخاطر الخارجية، لأن هنالك مخاطر تشغيلية متعلقة بأي مؤسسة، لكن المخاطر المالية مثل مخاطر الانترست ريت، مخاطر الصرف وغيرها من المخاطر المالية. ما هي الأشياء الأساسية التي تركز عليها؟
He is the academic advisor of the master program in financial management in IE Business School, Madrid, and he is the executive director at the UBS Investment Bank for 6 years. Dr. Ignacio is an associate professor of finance, equity valuation, financial accounting, and creative accounting. He has been ranked best professor of the Master in Financial Management 2006. Dr. Ignacio is working in the Institute, the Mercia Business School, IE. He has PhD in medieval history, MA in law, and MSc in economics and business administration, and major finance. Dr. Ignacio is an author of the case Sphera, excuse me if I didn't read correct, What's a Fair Price? Spain fourth UMTS license, published during 2003, awarded as the best case of the year 2002-2003 by IE Dean. He is nominated to prize Ray Gini, first in economics 2005 Nobel Prize Professor Sir Aaron Claude. Please.
Assalamu alaikum, and thank you very much to King Abdulaziz University. It's for me an honor to be addressing to you today. We are creating this platform, this Center of Islamic Economics and Finance between King Abdulaziz University and IE Business School. I'm pretty sure this center will be a key stone to promote Islamic finance within Europe and within business education. So we think we have great projects to move ahead together. Also, especially thank you for inviting me to speak about risk management after having seen that I have worked 7 years in UBS. Probably that's quite striking, taking into account what happened with UBS, that I'm going to be talking about risk management. Let me share with you my experience in UBS. The crisis started in July 2007. The CEO was sacked, and in September a new chief financial officer came to UBS. And actually he made a conference call with many fixed income people. And the question he said was, can you explain me what a CDO is? UBS had $45 billion in the balance sheet in CDOs, and the CFO didn't understand what a CDO was. This tells you something. This is real history. This tells you something on the nature of the crisis, which I think should make us reflect for the future. At the end, what has happened with risk does not only impact banks, it impacts Greenspan and his policy of low rates. He was not rational doing it. It impacts the Chinese central bank. The Chinese have bought $2 trillion, honoring McNamara's sentence. The US dollar is our currency, but it is your problem, he said to the Europeans. Now the US dollar is the American forex, but it's a Chinese problem. Were the Chinese rational buying $2 trillion in government bonds? This also helped the bubble. And also talking about banks, talking about central banks, talking about financiers, everything went wrong. And sometimes everything can go wrong, which is something which should make us reflect for the future. And it went wrong partially because of the models, because models are made based on the past, not looking into the future, and models are made based on numbers. Even though models should support our decision making, it should not be the key element when you take a decision. So models are extremely dangerous, and we should be thinking about this. Questions for debate. The first question I raised is the one that the CFO raised. What is a CDO squared? Actually, the banks began to do CDOs of CDOs. It reaches a point where finance is so complicated that it just loses common sense. Once you lose common sense, the risk for a bank is huge. And I think this is a key issue because I was saying to a colleague of mine before, you know the difference between a hedge fund and a bank? The difference is a bank is a hedge fund with much more leverage. A hedge fund is using a leverage structure of 1 equity, 3 debt. A bank, Western bank, is using 1 equity, 29 debt. This is extremely risky. This is a time bomb. And European banks are much more dangerous than US banks in terms of leverage. If you have 1 equity, 29 debt, and a minimum portion of assets, if they go wrong, the bank is bankrupt. So it is key to rethink about risk management. If you think about creating a fruit shop yourself, the fruit shop has just $100 in the assets, and you think about on the liability side having $2, $3 of equity, 97 of debt, you would say I'm crazy about starting a business like that. But the banking system works like that, and nobody had thought about that. People don't think about black swans. Had they told you Arthur Andersen is going to disappear in the year 2000, you wouldn't believe me. Had I told you 3 years ago Lehman Brothers is going to disappear, you wouldn't believe me. But black swans would exist. People thought that all the swans were white until a black swan was discovered in New Zealand in the 19th century. So we should be thinking about strange events which could change everything. And this especially impacts banking and finance. Can we think about counterparty risk? In finance, which is the risk-free rate? Everyone would say it is the US 10-year bond. But do you know that there is a credit default swap market when people can bet about the possibility that someone fails? And the credit default swap market is telling you that the probability of the US getting into bankruptcy has gone up. So it's no longer the 10-year bond, the risk-free rate. But what happens if the US just doesn't pay its debt? Who can protect you from that risk? No one will be able to honor that insurance. It's another question for debate. Which are the limits to financial deregulation? Financial deregulation was thought that let's allow risk to be spread all around the globe. And people with different appetites of risk will buy every asset. And what happened at the end is that people who were ignorant bought extremely risky assets. So we should be not regulating more the market, but having better regulation. Freddie Mac, Fannie Mae, both were very regulated entities and they were bankrupt. So it's not a question of more regulation, but better regulation. And here we should begin to think whether human beings are not as rational as economy predicts. We are not an homo economicus. For instance, should we open a debate to forbid variable rate mortgages? Because variable rates are very dangerous. In Spain, 98% of people take variable rates 40 years. And this is quite dangerous for the system, for the economy, and for the people. Should we begin to change regulation, taking into account that the human being is fragile when taking a decision? How do you assume future liquidity? When you have an asset which is liquid, you tend to believe it will be liquid in the future, and this could be a great mistake. Now, the 5 main mistakes I've seen in risk management in following this crisis, on one hand, is not measuring well the non-risks. If you think about my former bank, UBS, they bought subprime assets, mortgage-backed securities, and they just covered protection. They protected upon the first 2% loss. If you think about subprime, this is basically giving money to what we call ninjas.
Will be Charles Andrew Broadley. He's currently the Chief Executive Officer, CEO at Al-Khabir International BC since July 2007. Mr. Broadley's work experience includes working as Head of Investment Service Division at the National Commercial Bank, NCB, for 4 years, and as CEO at HFS Bank for 7 years. Mr. Broadley has 27 years of experience, comprising 20 years in senior positions in financial services, of which 6 years in South Africa, 3 years in Middle East, 5 years in the Middle East, 2 years in the United States, and 7 years in UK. He has worked 7 years in professional services, of which 4 years in South Africa, 3 years in the UK.
Assalamu alaikum. And to this great university, thank you very much for the opportunity to be invited to speak here. We at Al-Khabir have a very special relationship with King Abdulaziz University. We're the largest Islamic merchant bank in Jeddah, and as a result have built up a great relationship with the university, have recruited many people from this university, and are very happy to have enjoyed that relationship going forward. I, like Inesio, are going to speak in English, but hopefully you can find the presentation in your packs if you are not able to understand what I'm saying. I want to talk really about Islamic asset management, and if I think back to when I arrived at the beginning in Jeddah in 2003, 6 years ago, one of the first things I did, I was working for the largest Islamic asset management company in the world, here, based in Jeddah, and the first thing I wanted to do was to understand what people felt about Islamic asset management, and immediately commissioned a questionnaire to 500 investors in Saudi Arabia, 70% male, 30% female, 50% in Riyadh, 50% in Jeddah. And we asked these 500 people 71 questions. And these two questions were particularly interesting at that time. On the left-hand chart there, only 10% of the people we spoke to said that Sharia compliance of their investment product did not matter. And 90% said that Sharia compliance of their investment product was either important or very important to them. And on the right-hand pie, another question we asked them was very interesting. 65% said that they would use Sharia-compliant investment products even if they had to compromise some return or service quality. And it was with this very important research in mind as a foundation for our decision-making that was a mandate to believe strongly to keep developing the Islamic asset management industry. That people actually felt this resonated with what they wanted, and that they wanted to invest in a way that was aligned with their own deep-held faith. And from that early research, there has been great growth. As you can see from this slide, the number of Islamic funds in the world now has grown from 210 to 700, which is an annual growth rate of 21%. And the amount of assets under management, the amount of the value of the funds invested Islamically has grown from $20 billion to $44 billion. So even despite this big crash that we've been talking about, there is still a significant growth, 13% per annum, in the money that's invested Islamically in the world. And this is a function of an increase in the number of players, a lot more people involved in the business, a very large increase in the types of funds available for people, and that means a better choice for investors. And we've seen that investors have been putting their money into these types of funds. The concentration of these funds has mainly been in the countries here, in the GCC and in Malaysia. And from this pie chart, in fact, which is the top 6 countries in the world, 5 of those, all but one small one there, is either in GCC or Malaysia. And so those countries really have well over 80% of the Islamic asset management funds in the world. And as you can see, there really is a lot of unfinished business. There are large populations in the world of Muslims where there is not a thriving Islamic asset management industry. Some of those examples there of huge populations of people who are not getting the delivery of Islamic product that, for example, we are here in Saudi Arabia. The good news is that, by and large, Sharia-compliant investing has outperformed conventional investing. One of the main reasons for this is, as you probably know, that in avoiding riba, we have avoided investing in conventional banks. And not surprisingly, from what you've heard from my colleagues, from Dr. Ahmed and from Ignacio, the banks have been one of the ones that have suffered the most in this environment, and probably justifiably so. And so, fortunately or otherwise, being Islamic investors, we've been able to avoid some of the worst investment performance. And that difference in the top two lines there, the red and the blue line, is actually an 8% difference over the last year and a half, which is quite significant in terms of outperformance of Sharia-compliant investing. But even though it has done better than conventional, it does not mean that things have been good. Clearly, in each of the asset classes that you look at, in equity investing, which is the stock market, there have been large losses, a lot of volatility, ups and downs, and some major, selling off of equity holding. In the fixed income, we've also seen lots of, in the area of sukuk and other areas like that, we have seen a lot of pressure as well, as we have seen those corporate spreads widening and the discounts on sukuks getting bigger and bigger relative to the underlying. And in real estate, we've seen the same thing in property. A lot of distressed sellers, people having to sell real estate, and a fall in valuations. And so you can almost say there hasn't really been a safe place to be during this time, even for someone who's investing Islamically. And even cash hasn't been very attractive either, because there's been a big flight to quality. And of course, as you know, the cash returns, if you look at your Murabaha funds and so on, the returns are very, very low. Profit rates are extremely low. And you're all familiar with what's really happened in our local market, in the Tadawa, in the Tazi. An incredible increase. If you see how, when I arrived here in Jeddah in the beginning of 2003, the Tazi was about 2,500 Tadawa all share. And then we had this amazing bull run all the way up until February 2006, when it peaked at 20,600. And everyone who was living here will know what those days were like. There was really nothing else to talk about other than what was happening in the stock market that day. The chat rooms of our websites here did nothing else but talk about it. And everyone just did whatever they could to put whatever amount of money they could into the stock market. It was a crazy time. And then, of course, it peaked and has fallen way back, had a bit of a recovery a couple of times, and then, of course, suffered the second wave when we saw the international markets collapsing after Lehman Brothers went down in September of last year. So it has been a very roller coaster ride here. And maybe this is a surprise to you, this slide, in terms of showing you how, if you put on the same graph the oil price in the blue line and our local market, the Tadawa, on the red line, how these two have not been correlated. Often if you talk to someone else in the world, they say, well, obviously, if oil's going up, your market must be going up, and the other way around. This is not actually what's happened. If you look at the experience of the last 6 years, we had our big boom in our stock market long before the oil price started to rise. And when the blue line started to rise, in fact, we were suffering enormously, and it has not been correlation. The correlation coefficient of these two is very, very low. That doesn't mean it won't always be the case, but we have been driven by other factors, and not actually by the oil price. And even though the oil price has been good for the economy as a whole, there has been this mismatch of stock market prices with what's actually been going on in the economy, and how, as a country, we have actually been performing, which is quite confusing.
For very wealthy clients, and brought one client asset worth than $250 million, generating revenue of $2 million after all costs. He won a Grocery Investment Professional Award in City Wealth Magazine 2006 survey, with a black belt, first dan in martial art of Jiu-Jitsu. I have to leave him alone with you on the stage.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great pleasure to be here today. I'd like to thank Dr. Turkestani and the university for making this possible. Now, among all the speakers, I'm probably the least academic, and I doubt if there's anything I can teach you about Islam or Islamic finance. However, I do have some observations I'd like to share based on my experience so far. Now, there's lots of talk about Islamic finance growing at fast rates. However, when you get fast growth rates, you also get growing pains. And this is why I've made the theme of the talk one of adolescence. Because teenagers, as you probably know, think they know best, and they rebel and don't want to listen to their parents. It reminds me of a phrase by Winston Churchill, Britain's wartime leader. He said that from the age of 16 to 21, I thought my parents knew nothing. But by the age of 22, I was amazed at how much they'd learned. So in other words, their wisdom had been there all the time, but because of our mood and our phase, we'd forgotten that wisdom. And I think that's happening in Islamic finance at the moment. Let's move past my background, which is covered. Now, by way of introduction, I actually believe what's going on in markets is very positive, which might sound a bit strange. But like many things in life, what at first seems painful is actually a blessing in disguise. Why? Because I believe this is the end of a dark age of debt creation. And like all deformations and periods of change, it's very painful. But it needs to be painful to reject the old ways and welcome the new. Because pain is part of the cure. So the topics I'm covering today involve pushing the boundaries, looking at some possible solutions, and just a quick word on what's happened to me personally. So when it comes to pushing the boundaries, you think, well, okay, it's all very well to say the West is going downhill and it's had its day. But it's really worth looking back and saying, why did the West become so successful, particularly in America? And I believe that the success was based on the work of the founding fathers who wrote the American Constitution. They fought off the British and formed their own independent United States. Their idea was that they wanted the country to be for the benefit of future generations and not just for them. And because they laid such a solid groundwork, the 19th century was one of great prosperity, of a strong currency, based of course on gold and silver, but the idea that money could be used productively through venture capital. Now sadly in the modern era, the founding fathers have been let down, not by anything from the outside, but from decay from within. And the decay comes from inflation mongers, people who mass produce money, who are bailing out the economy at any excuse. Why? Because it makes them popular, it's a short-term popular solution. So it's been failed from within. Now, looking at Islamic finance, in this adolescent phase, there's always a paradox, particularly with teenagers, because they want to follow fashion, but they're looking for their own identity as well. And this is typical. I was in Riyadh the other night, I saw all the kids on their skateboards trying to look cool and trendy. And that's just a fact. And this too is happening in Islamic finance, where everywhere you look, the products look more and more Western. And likewise with Sukuk, before Dr. Usmani came out and said that many of the issues were not compliant, more and more were being issued with guaranteed capital and guaranteed rates of return. But also for teenagers, they don't want to sound old-fashioned or like their parents. And for me, when I go to an Islamic finance conference, I very rarely hear any talk about Islam. It's all about finance. I think, well, okay, this is not what I'm here for. I want to hear what the Prophet, peace be upon him, did and what examples he gave for modern finance. Other pitfalls I see are the way that the products are being copied. Now, for example, we see the use of hedge funds and mimicking the returns from hedge funds using swap contracts. Also, I think there's a strange pattern at the moment whereby many indices in Islamic finance are offered by Western institutions and banks. I just can't see why this can't be done locally. And if anyone wants a hand producing an index, I'd be more than happy to do it. It's not difficult. So part of the benefit of sticking to the rules in Islamic finance is that, as Dr. Sami was saying, this creates stability. You're not going for growth all the time or trying to abuse the natural order. You want a nice, stable banking platform. However, at the moment, if anyone says, oh, bring Islamic finance back to basics, they're accused, like I was 2 weeks ago in Bahrain, of trying to bring Islamic countries back to the Stone Age. It's a case of don't rock the boat, there's no controversy here. Now there's a strong temptation to offer these guaranteed products and fixed returns because it's easy for the bank and the institution and investors, apparently like it. And more I see the exception in Islamic finance becoming the rule. So more and more tenuous concepts are being used as an excuse to repeat these products. So typically they obey the letter of the law, but not the spirit. You might say, well, why should I stick to basics? Why should I not try and copy Western products? Well, I believe that complexity is not clever. And the beauty of the credit crisis is a revelation of an ugly truth that complex products are full of trickery, they'll probably lose you money. So if this comes to an end, then that's all well and good. Likewise with derivatives, it's very tempting to hedge yourself all the time. And it's clear from the amount of derivatives in circulation that it's far more than hedging. In the credit default swap market, there is a far greater notional value compared with all corporate bonds. So obviously there's speculation going on. And it's a bit like doing something bad individually. If we all do it, the environment suffers. And the example I've given here is with toxins. Now, in the old days, in the 60s, people were using pesticides to help the crops. And over time, the poison accumulated and went up and up the food chain and got more and more deadly. And this is the same with derivatives. The more they are used, the greater the systemic risk. And as things stand, we now have, per person on the planet, an exposure of $200,000 notional each. And it only takes a small mistake, as Dr. Ignacio was saying, a small loss or small percentage deterioration can wipe out significant amounts of capital. So in the case of the world economy, we have 45 trillion GDP, and yet all derivative exposure is 30 times the world economy. So basically we're like an investment bank. So what is this crisis doing? I believe it's going to bring an end to fractional banking, which is in itself an imbalance of risk and reward, which is what Sharia-compliant investment is not. So looking at potential solutions, well, we've got to look at the bottlenecks first of all. One thing that a lot of people complain about is the cost of products and services for that matter. As we all know, there's a lack of scholars, especially those with financial sophistication. And even where there isn't a shortage of scholars, you often find consultants and advisors hoarding data, not sharing information, and charging very high levels for their services. So in effect, they become a barrier to entry. So you're trying to produce a product, you have immediate, very high costs, which you pass on to the client. Now, I've done a core list of beneficial and non-beneficial aspects to products, which you'll all recognise, but it's a possible way of looking at a core set of principles to judge products, whether they are good or bad. I call it the elephant test because when you look, see, smell an elephant, it probably is. And this applies to many products I see in the market. Now, at the moment, I'm finding that the Islamic industry is very disjointed. There's institutions all over the landscape, and there doesn't seem to be a great deal of coordination and communication. And often, I think this is down to the human nature. It's something that Barack Obama referred to the other week. He said, we often define ourselves by our differences. It's very easy to say, oh, they've got a different type of Islam to me, and I'm not going to use them. But there are some very good examples from history where you can combine very diverse views without compromising your own beliefs and create a portfolio effect to great benefit. And the military examples are several. For example, when Hannibal took on the Roman army before the time of the Prophet Isa, he used 7 different languages. His army had 7 different languages and many different skills, but by combining those diverse qualities, he was able to beat a uniform and disciplined Roman army. Likewise, when Genghis Khan was trying to unite his tribes, he took out a single arrow and snapped it over his knee. He then took a bunch of arrows, and this time they would not break. In other words, when combined and when united, it's a far more powerful force. And the beauty of Islam is that throughout the Islamic world, there is a core philosophy that we can all stick to. So you don't need reams of regulation, you just need good leadership to bring these institutions together. Because, of course, there is a danger of Islamic institutions fragmenting into Malaysia versus GCC and so on. Hopefully there will be a leader to bring these together. Now, another thing I find difficult in the Islamic finance business is to find information. Now, one of the ways that Western science, medicine and technology benefited was by publishing research. Now, I'm from an academic family, although I'm not one myself, and the idea is that when you study or produce your research, it immediately goes out to the public and your contemporaries for criticism, praise, or suggestions. And I don't find this with the fatwa, for example. Dr. Nagoka at the end has to go to different banks and get translations from Arabic to study fatwa. And I'd love to see this information publicly available online, and in that way, over time, the more the fatwa are viewed and studied by contemporaries, the more consistent and transparent they'll become. So any strange cases will immediately be seen to be non-compliant. And eventually, as you reduce the costs and increase the information, Islamic products will become cheaper. And by default, as the costs go down, their usage will go up. So looking at Andrew's chart earlier, I'm sure more and more Islamic investors will use these products. Another thing I'd like to see is an overall Islamic ratings agency. Not one to do with credit or credit ratings, but one that can judge the quality of Sharia compliance. And this is going to be very difficult with so many schools of Islamic thought. However, again, we have a very good example from history. Back in the 12th century, I believe, you had the House of Wisdom. Now, Islamic scholars were famous for preserving and conserving knowledge from the ancient world. Not only doing that, but actually studying it and improving on that information. And on top of that, passing it on and disseminating that data. So it's a very good worked example of how we could follow that sort of wisdom. And maybe this university could become a kind of production line for future scholars. So instead of having just a few scholars who are completely overworked and travelling all the time, maybe their workload could be shared among more junior staff who are studying to follow their footsteps. And this happens typically in the West as well, where top lawyers don't do all the work themselves, their apprentices do the background job for them, and they do the final sign-off once they check it. Just very quickly on the personal side, as Dr. Tukastani was saying, a year ago I was a speculator, I was trading futures and commodities, and so I'm not trying to be holier than now in discussing my past. But what I did find was a blessing in disguise, is that when my boss went to go into politics and shut down the funds, I suddenly thought, well, why am I doing this? I don't enjoy having to trade every month to make a profit, month in, month out. I thought, well, I've already got the Islamic qualification, I really love the topic, why don't I try and use this and build on it? Because the philosophy is so good that this just shouldn't be for Muslim investors. Islamic finance should be for everybody. So I see my role as having to demystify the topic, write articles, and really get the idea out that Sharia is nothing to be scared of. When you see British newspapers, there's lots of anti-Islamic headlines. So instead, I'll have to almost disguise the idea, because often if you're trying to present a new concept two people, you'd have to sell the good parts of saying, actually you avoid gearing, you're sharing risk and reward. It's a very grown-up form of finance. I'm going to skip through the next few pages because they're about what I'm doing on the business side. But my core philosophy is that rather than chasing the wealthy investors, I'd like to offer Islamic finance to the retail and mid-market by offering diversified and low-cost funds. That means that anyone who works with me has to be on a profit share or have equity and share risk and reward. Even the lawyers I work with in Guernsey have agreed to go on equity, so it is possible. I just want to finish off with my personal goals for Guernsey. Now, Guernsey is a very small island situated between Britain and France, and it's been labelled a tax haven by various countries. And to some extent, they have been at fault in the crisis. Why? Because Guernsey is the home of very speculative investment products, like hedge funds, leveraged private equity, and even commercial property. Gearing abounds on our island. What I'd like to do is help Guernsey to transform and become an Islamic finance centre. We're in a perfect situation between Britain and France because both countries really want to get into the Islamic finance side, and perhaps we can help the Spanish as well. But also I was discussing this morning with some of the gentlemen of the university that Guernsey was home to an interest-free experiment over a period of 100 years. Almost all of our infrastructure, from roads, schools and our market, were built without any private bank, without any interest-bearing debt. And this was done from a time of great crisis where we were virtually bloodless through interest, drawing out our wealth. And so, as the home of interest-free finance, I think we can evolve to do this again. We also found out a few weeks ago that Guernsey has its own gold mint. So there's a chance here that we could give our currency a precious metal backing, again to set a lead for the rest of the world. And finally, on my own personal goals, I'd like to create an Islamic bank, but I'd give it a bit of a Western name because, it's a bit like when you have children. When you're trying to feed them something which is good for them, but they don't like, or they say, oh, I've never had that before, I don't want to touch it. You've got to try and package it in a different way. So when I create Islamic funds, they will have a Western look, but lots of Sharia overtones. So Muslims will know what they are, but Westerners will sort of say, well, that's a useful product, that looks interesting. This guy's a Westerner. Oh, and he predicted the crash. Hopefully this will help them to invest in Islamic compliant products. And eventually, I believe that Islamic finance and investment will be very popular. And we know from the likes of Malcolm Gladwell, who wrote books like Tipping Point and Blink, that trends can take hold very, very quickly when the context and timing is right. And I think we're very close to that now. So just to summarise, I believe Islamic finance and funds are coming of age after many growing pains. But there needs to be an almost Western-style economies of scale and efficiency behind it. Not compromising the principles, but using that form of technology, never forgetting the ethical side to it. And I believe Sharia principles provide a positive protection. Now this means we shouldn't be looking for ways around it or looking for obscure hadith to justify a product, but just accept that this can't be done because it breaks the rules. It's that simple. Ladies and gentlemen, I've had a great deal of satisfaction from my studies of Islam and Islamic finance for the last couple of years, and it's made a great deal of difference in my life personally, and I'm just delighted this has happened. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Toby Bersh. I think he made us travel with him into, if I may say so, into civilizations, history, and philosophy. I will mention just very quick points in Arabic of what he said. توبي بيرش طبعا أصبح يعني تعرف في التمويل الإسلامي خلال 3 سنوات فقط، ومن ذلك نخطوة مهتم بالتمويل الإسلامي ومحاولة نشره في مجال عمله. الشركة التي فتحها باسمه بيرش ليميتد بيتعامل فيها بمبادئ التمويل الإسلامي، ويحاول أن يطبق قد ما يستطيع في هذا الجانب، بل أن الجزيرة التي يعني يعمل فيها وجزيرة في كما قال بين فرنسا وبريطانيا جزيرة مونسي يحاول أن يحولها إلى صناعة التموين الإسلامي، وأن بها أيضا منجم للذهب لعله يكون بداية للعودة إلى قاعدة الذهب. هو تحدث عن قضية بعض الإشكالات اللي وجدها من تجربته في التمويل التقليدي، وكيف أن هناك في نوع من الكومبلكسيتي أو التعقيد، وكيف أن التبسيط هو لا شك أنه أفضل، والمبالغة في الاهتمام بالنمو مقابل الاستقرار، وأن الاستقرار لا شك أنه هو أفضل. أيضا أشار إلى قضية التناقض الذي قائم في صناعة التمويل الإسلامي بين رغبة هذه الصناعة أن تكون معاصرة وأن تكون presenter. Dr. Sami Sweden, I think he's very well known in our university, and we are very proud to have him here. He is the Deputy Director of the Islamic Research and Training Institute, the Islamic Development Bank Group in Jeddah since September 2007. Dr. Sweden, when he was the first recipient of Hemin Minsky Prize for Distinguished Performance in Macroeconomics, Washington University, 1994. He has 27 research work papers in Islamic economics and finance. He has MA in economics, PhD in economics from the United States. He was a teaching assistant, Department of Economics, Southern Illinois University. He worked previously at the Rajli Bank for 6 years as Chief Consultant Research Center, and then as a manager, Department of Research and Development, Sharia Group. Please, Dr. Sami.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. سعادة وكيل الجامعة دكتور عبد الرحمن اليوبي، أصحاب السعادة وكلاء الجامعة ومدير الكليات، الإخوة الحضور جميعا. نشكر جامعة الملك عبد العزيز على تنظيم هذه الندوة المباركة وعلى إتاحة الفرصة للقاء بكم مرة أخرى في هذا المقام الطيب بإذن الله عز وجل. يبدو لي أني سأحذو حذو الدكتور أحمد بالوافي وأحقق نوع من التوازن. The slides will be in English but the presentation will be in Arabic. أرجو أن هذا يحقق نوع من diversification، توزيع أو تنويع الأصول. موضوع المشاركة اليوم هو عن اختلال الأجال بين الأصول وبين الالتزامات أو الخصوم. كيف كان أحد العوامل الأساسية في الأزمة المالية الحالية، وكيف يمكن ما هي الحلول المقترحة. من حيث المبدأ اختلال الآجال، لما نقول هناك اختلال في الآجال نقصد أن الالتزامات تكون أقصر من الأصول. فيقوم البنك على سبيل المثال يقترض قروض قصيرة الأجل ثم يقرض قروض طويلة الأجل، يقترض لمدة شهر ثم يقرض لمدة سنة، سنتين، 3. يبقى السؤال ماذا يفعل إذا حل الشهر وهو الأموال وظفت خلاص؟ يقترض مرة أخرى أو يدور القرض مرة ثانية، يعدل القرض الأول يؤجله وهكذا. فيصبح عملية تدوير للقرض قصير الأجل إلى أن يتم حلول الدين الأصلي طويل الأجل في جانب الأصول. بالنسبة للمصارف التجارية هذا هو المعمول به. بالنسبة للودائع، الودائع تعتبر قروض قصيرة الأجل، هي حالة دائما تحت الطلب، في حين أن البنك يستخدم هذه الأموال ويقرضها لقروض تكون طويلة الأجل مقارنة بالودائع. أو إذا كان هناك ودائع مثلا لأجل لمدة شهر أو شهرين أو 3، نفس النظام. فهناك اقتراض قصير الأجل وتوظيف طويل الأجل، فهناك عدم توافق بين الأصول وبين الالتزامات. والفائدة أو مصلحة البنك أو المؤسسة هي الفرق بين فائدة قروض قصيرة الأجل وبين الفائدة طويلة الأجل. عادة الفائدة طويلة الأجل تكون أعلى عادة من الفائدة قصيرة الأجل. فهذه الفروق إذا أخذت في الاعتبار ممكن البنك يحقق ربحية، وإن كان طبعا يعرض للمخاطر. هناك أيضا نوع آخر من عدم التوافق بين الأصول والالتزامات فيما يتعلق بالعملات، يقترض بعملة ويقرض بعملة أخرى. أيضا السبب هو الفرق بين الفائدة على العملتين. من ناحية اقتصادية قد يكون هناك فوائد لعملية يسمى تحويل الأصول، وهو أنك تقترض قرض قصير الأجل ثم توظف توظيف طويل الأجل. يقولون أن هناك فائدة إيجاد السيولة، بمعنى أن أي واحد من المودعين على سبيل المثال يستطيع يسحب فلوسه، في حين أن هذه الأموال موظفة في قروض وفي مشاريع وفي أعمال تجارية. فهذه السيولة، هذا نوع من خلق السيولة كما يقال كوظيفة إيجابية يعني للمودعين وللمقرضين القروض قصيرة الأجل إذا كانت على شكل ودائع أو قروض قصيرة الأجل. لكن هذه المنافع يقابلها تكاليف أيضا. أول هذه التكاليف ما يسمى مغالطة التجميع، fallacy of composition. فأصحاب الودائع لو جو كلهم في نفس الوقت يريدون ودائعهم لا يمكن أن يوفي البنك وسينهار، رغم أن البنك يقول لكل واحد منهم أنت حسابك تحت الطلب. يعني البنك يقول لكل مودع في أي لحظة تريد حسابك الأموال جائزة، لكن لا يستطيع أن يوفي بهذا للجميع في نفس الوقت. هذه مغالطة تجميع، شيء يصلح لشخص واحد لكن لا يصلح للمجموع في نفس الوقت. هذا ما يسمى ريسك اوف فرنز، اللي التدافع. على مدى التاريخ في تاريخ المصارف يحصل هناك، لو حصل هزة في الثقة عند المودعين أو جرت إشاعة والله أن البنك الفلاني قد لا يكون قادر على أن فعلا يوفي أو يرد أموال المودعين، مجرد إشاعة كافية في أن الناس يتدافعون. لو كل واحد ظن أن البنك سوف ينهار فكل واحد يقول أنا ألحق قبل الآخرين، ولكن لو كلهم فعلا جو ينهار البنك حتى لو ما كان في شيء أصلا. يعني هذا الشيء يغذي نفسه بنفسه، مجرد الإشاعة كافي في أن الناس يندفعون وفعلا يتسبب بانهيار البنك. ما يسمى التنبؤات التي تحقق نفسها بنفسها self-fulfilling prophecies or expectations. بطبيعة الحال هذه الآلية تؤدي إلى مديونية عالية ويؤدي إلى ما يسمى مخاطر ذاتية. معناها يصبح القطاع المالي مخاطر من داخله، لأن أي هزة مثل ما ذكرنا، أي إشاعة، أي هزة في الثقة كافية في حصول كارثة حتى لو لم يوجد مخاطر حقيقية خارج النظام. وهذا اللي ما جعل الأنظمة المالية هشة وغير مستقرة، ومن ثم نشأ عندنا ما يسمى سيستميك ريسك أو المخاطر النظامية، المخاطر الكلية على مستوى النظام ككل وليس على مستوى البنك بحد ذاته. كثير من الكوارث العالمية في عام 97 على سبيل المثال وغيرها في الدول النامية وغير ومتقدمة كانت ترجع في النهاية إلى مشكلة اختلال بين القروض قصيرة الأجل وبين التزامات وقروض قصيرة الأجل وأصول طويلة الأجل، ومن ثم أي هزة تصبح هذه المؤسسات في الحال معرضة للانهيار والكوارث. ويسمي بعض الباحثين يسمونها الخطيئة الأولى، وهي إما عدم القدرة أو عدم الرغبة لأن يكون هناك توافق بين القروض وبين الالتزامات، بين الأصول والالتزامات. فعدم القدرة على اقتراض قروض طويلة الأجل لتمويل الأصول طويلة الأجل يسمى الخطيئة الكبرى. هذا ما يسمى هذا النوع من بناء الأصول والالتزامات أدى إلى ما يسمى المخاطر الذاتية. أصبح القطاع المالي مثل ما ذكرنا يحمل مخاطر من داخله، هو ليس 70% من تقلبات القطاع المالي هي من داخل القطاع المالي وليس لها أي علاقة بالقطاع الحقيقي ولا المخاطر الخارجية. ريتشارد بوكستاور هذا قبل 25 سنة تخرج من MIT بدكتوراه اقتصاد واشتغل مدير صناديق اشتغل في مورغان ستانلي وجولدمان ساكس والآن عنده هيدج فند، وكتب في كتاب نشره قبل الأزمة بقليل أن الحقيقة أن الأسواق المالية تزايد فيها المخاطر بالرغم من الانخفاض المستمر والمضطرد في تقلبات الاقتصاد الحقيقي، يدل على وجود خلل جوهري في بنية النظام المالي. اختلال الأصول والأجال هذا يشبه ما يسمى النظام الهرمي أو البونزي سكيم. النظام الهرمي تأخذ من زيد تعطي عمرو، بعدين تأخذ من بكر تعطي زيد، بعدين تأخذ. النظام الهرمي قام على أنك دائما تأخذ من الشخص، لابد يكون هناك ضحية جديدة علشان ترضي البقية، وهذا هو الذي يحصل بالضبط في اختلال الأجل. لأنك لما تقترض قرض قصير الأجل لمدة يوم أو أسبوع أو شهر وهذا القرض يوظف لمدة سنة، معناها لازم بعد شهر تبحث عن مقرض جديد لكي يسدد الدين الأول، ثم بعد شهر تالي تبحث عن مقرض ثالث، وهكذا. فكلهم يعتمدون على نفس الفكرة، تأخذ من من باء لتعطي ألف، ومن جيم لتعطي باء، ومن دال لتعطي إلى آخره. فالإفلاس أو الانهيار يحصل إذا توقفت هذه السلسلة، لأي سبب توقفت هذه السلسلة سيحصل انهيار. طبعا في فرق أن المؤسسات اللي تقوم على اختلال الآجال في النهاية تملك أصول، بينما النظام الهرمي في الحال لا يملك أصول. وفي دراسات تشير إلى أن النظام الهرمي ممكن يوجد نظام هرمي مثالي إذا كان هناك توقع أن الحكومة سوف تتدخل. يعني لو واحد سوى نظام هرمي ضخم جدا وكارثي بحيث لو انهار ستصبح كارثة وستدخل الحكومة، فسيكون من المقبول يعني عند الأشخاص اللي يشاركون في هذا النظام الهرمي، رغم أنهم عارفين أنه ما في حاجة.